Okay, perfect. Okay, so guys, we're well into JavaScript. We began doing JavaScript last week. And I think what we're going to do is every class we're going to do some very simple, very focused examples that will get you using the language. And the first thing we're going to cover are really what makes JavaScript special and unique, what makes JavaScript light up, why is JavaScript relevant, what are some various use cases. And so concepts such as document object model are meaningful, or HTML nodes, or the array of HTML elements, or ID. Concepts like this are going to come up. Other ideas such as URL parameters, or navigating through the document object model, or JSON. These are things that make JavaScript unique and meaningful. Once you begin to kind of grasp the JavaScript purpose, or why do we have JavaScript, and why do we embed a programming language within a web page, and why has JavaScript gone this far? Where is it going? Is it the language of the future? Once we begin to take a look at what JavaScript is doing on a page, then we're going to start to look at some of the more advanced programming techniques used in it. So we're talking about, and let me say that the programming within JavaScript is very simplistic. It's not hyper elaborate. It's a lot simpler than Java, where there's a lot of ways to do things in Java. Python, it's very articulated. There are libraries within Python that make arrays incredibly efficient. That's largely missing within JavaScript. JavaScript is the simplest programming language I've ever worked with, but it's good because it deals with the most complex topic, which is the internet itself and data sets that get moved around the internet. It has to do with security, validation. So JavaScript can get complicated, but it's because you think of all the things that it's interacting with. It's pulling upon HTML elements. It's processing form data. It's navigating from page to page. The challenge of JavaScript is an organizational challenge. It's not a mathematical or a calculus or a machine learning challenge. It's an organizational challenge because you have a site architecture that you are operating against. And I want to prepare you for that and make that easy for you by talking about what makes JavaScript particularly interesting. So I want to get into two examples today where we're talking about onClick and an addEventListener. So the last time we got together, we were talking about, and I don't want to go searching for this. Let's just pause while we get. Hi, coming in. Hey, coming in. I'm just recording. So, last time we got together, we were looking at Bootstrap, and we were saying Bootstrap is gorgeous. Bootstrap is this retinal element. It's a visible element. It gives identity and design to the web. The web is basically documents. Bootstrap is dressing up and giving style, personality to the documents. The other question we were asking is, can we create JavaScript that's doing web development for us?
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. And I think when you're in this class, you're kind of indoctrinated, you're kind of taught this style of JavaScript that says, hey, let's not be creating HTML. Let's be writing JavaScript. Let's let the JavaScript create the HTML. And the argument in favor of that is that, well, if we have large blocks of data, let's go ahead and parse the data, and then let's build the page around the data. And that's a little different than what you did in the first month of the class, where you were saying, hi, welcome to my page. Let's write the HTML by hand. Let's build the page around the HTML. The HTML is a structure. We can make gorgeous pages. And so where I'm taking you next is making more of a JavaScript, making more of a JavaScript-centric way of doing things, where we're going to orient around what is JavaScript capable of, and let's take JavaScript out for as big a spin as we can. So if we were to flip your paradigm, where if we were to say HTML rules, If we were to flip that paradigm and say, let's not code any HTML at all, how would we do it? And why would we do it? And the answer is, well, we want to pass the client an HTML page with no HTML on it, but a body tag and 50 lines of JavaScript. And can JavaScript handle that job? And the answer is, yeah, it kind of lives for these high efficiency, high data, high presentation challenges. But in order to get there, you want to consume what we did last time, where we did getElementById, then we did append child, create element, create text element, and that way we were painting the page with HTML, which is really valuable. If we were an eBay or a Craigslist, the pages at the core of the internet, or an Amazon, those brands all rely upon heavy data exchange and then painting the page relative to the data that we're receiving. Twitter is that way. There's very little HTML there. There's just a lot of JavaScript, and JavaScript is painting the page. That's a good strategy. It allows you to be data-centric. If you're going at that, you definitely want to use the skills from last time. So now we're more into functionality and how do we make events on the page. And let me say this. It would be great if I just bewildered you for the first couple days. It would be great if you're feeling like a ton of bricks is on top of you. That would be awesome, because you guys are just going to get used to these things. And once you're used to it, my work is done. The first couple days where you're getting used to add child, append child, create element, getElementById, addEventListener. Those are bewildering days. I remember learning JavaScript for the first time, and I was like, what is all this gobbledygook? I'm used to HTML. Why can't I live within HTML? And frankly, the transition is a little bit more abrupt than when you start to learn HTML and then suddenly there was CSS. I remember working with students who never could make the transition from HTML to working with cascading style sheets. I'm glad you guys are not that group where you're like, okay, let's do Bootstrap, fine. And suddenly I've got all these Bootstrap pages. That's really good. In the past, I've had students who never could transition from the hard work of HTML to the low work of CSS. And now you're transitioning to the no work of JavaScript, where JavaScript is painting the page for you. That's the most advanced stage. And let me just say that when entrepreneurs come to you and they have an idea, they usually have ideas that are built upon data. They're saying, I have a ton of data and I want to build UIs around the data. Can the data be the basis for the customer experience? And the answer is yes. There's always more data. Somebody said that, I read a statistic the other day that 90% of the data in the world was produced in the last 2 years. That to me is kind of like I like statistics like that, but there's no way that anybody knows what all the data in the world is. The only message is that as organizations go, we're producing more data than we used to, and we're doing more with the data than we used to. So entrepreneurs are more engaged with the idea of data as a product, where we have a ton of data. Can we put the customer in charge of data, or can we present more data to the customer? And the answer is we don't know yet. There's a few companies who are really good at simplifying data for customers. Instagram, Facebook, they've really gotten us into the ball game of putting a lot of data on the consumer's doorstep and saying, hey, there's a lot for you to look at. And so their success stories related to data, and they're well beyond just the Amazon, Craigslist, eBay. The Twitter, Facebook, Instagram people are all about immersing the public in tons of data that arrives in the shape of photographs, embeds, comments, hashtags. I'm wondering if that's the future. I continue to look at Instagram and I'm thinking, I need to pull myself away from this. There's something about the single image that is limiting to people at this point. The last 10 years, people have been very engaged with Instagram. Now we're on year 10, and I have a sense that people are fatiguing, like they're looking for something else, something more. We don't know what that is. Is it metaverse? It might be, it may not be. It may be the kind of thing where you have an Apple Glass, where you have a little bit of data at the right time. It may be that people pull away from it. I find that I am spending less time on my laptop. Instead, I'm spending more time with 2 gigantic screens. I feel like after the pandemic, I've my laptops are not used as much. I have really awesome desktop, but I sense that the web is not going away, and asking people to interact with more data on a day-to-day basis is continuing. We keep doing that. So what I want to do today is I want to say, I want to work with HTML events such as onClick. I want to pull in a little bit of JavaScript to work with that, and I want to work with addEventListener. And then in a few days, we'll begin integrating this. Usually it's about now where I ask people to recall the Karate Kid. And I ask people...
Which one?
The original.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. The Pat Morita. Have you guys seen the original Ralph Macchio, Pat Morita?
You mean the only one?
Karate Kid. Well, hasn't there been a couple of them now? Like Jackie Chan.
The Jackie Chan one was
had one.
Technically Kung Fu Kid.
Okay, so it wasn't Karate Kid. It was Kung Fu Kid. That was like tour de force. I mean, if you go back and see Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio and the Karate Kid, in my generation, that was like the state of the art.
Yeah.
Like that was what movies were about. It's probably there. That's like a YouTube indie project would be the equivalent of a big Hollywood picture in my day, So what I like about Karate Kid is it's really about this guy who instructs this young person in a discipline in a very repetitive way. And so he has him painting fences, and he's waxing the car, and he's fixing his deck. And the kid feels very humiliated by this. And he's like, when am I going to learn some Kung Fu?
No, I mean the Jackie Chan one, the original karate.
Well, you know what? I can't recall a Jackie Chan one apart from that it had brilliant eye candy. It was so visual.
It took place in China, so that's why I'm saying this karate is Japanese.
The Karate Kid. No, I'm still on the... No, this is true. I think the Karate Kid, Pat Morita, was trying to tell a Japanese story. I think you're correct. I don't know if you're coming into...
That one is karate, yeah. That one's karate.
I don't know if you're coming into the recording. I hope you are.
Oh.
Because otherwise I'm going to sound insane, like I'm talking to a person who's not there.
No, I'm just saying, like, the remake technically isn't karate.
The remake is not karate. Okay. Well, I'm happy to be educated in that way. I did think I was aware that... Well, the Karate Kid happens in Encino, California.
Exactly, yeah.
It doesn't actually happen on the Great Wall. I think, the second one, but Cobra Kai, I haven't gotten there yet. I don't have the character to watch Cobra Kai. I don't have the wherewithal to watch that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can summarize for me. But I think you guys are in the Karate Kid stage right now where you're sort of saying, why am I having to wax this old Studebaker? Why do I have to clean this deck? Why do I have to paint the fence? When am I going to learn some Kung Fu? And then Pat Morita roundhouses him or brings down, the cement blocking punch down, and the kid defends himself by waxing on. Does that make sense? So I just need to tell you that I'm aware of what I'm doing by putting a lot on your plate. And you are just going to use it at some point. But you have to go through the experience of trying stuff. And then eventually you bring forth the symphony, which is you have 10 JavaScript methods that you can use symphonically. The people who built the web to where it is right now saw the web as a choreography. And the early web services movement was built upon this idea of choreography. So the early IETF specifications had a lot to do with choreographing a web experience. But choreographing is thought of as coordinating people in a dance. Does that make sense? There's a choreography. I like to see it as a symphonic, where we are bringing these elements into harmony. But it means that you need to spend a lot of time with your little tuba or your little trumpet making a lot of bad music. As long as you keep playing, it's going to get nice. I guarantee it. So you need to stick with it. All right, so let's go through today. Now, a lot of this looks very familiar. There's the HTML, the body. This is what's new. OnClick is an HTML component. And when you're learning JavaScript, you have to understand that there's the JavaScript world that happens between the script tag. And none of that is the HTML world. This is a completely different isolated experience. And then outside of it is the HTML. It's a completely different isolated experience. There have to be connectors or little portals that send data back and forth to the two engines. HTML is a rendering engine. It is making things appear. JavaScript is a compilation engine. It is dealing directly with the RAM of the system. You will never see JavaScript operate. You will only see HTML. So there has to be a transition between the visible and the invisible, more transmission-centered systems. So here you have an H2, and you're saying when you click upon this text, go ahead and trigger delta text, which delta change. You're going to send forth this item. So typically when you're dealing with JavaScript, you have an ID, and my ID is always X, I find. But here you don't have an ID. You have simply a this. And you're sending the this to delta text. Delta text is a function name, and now we can talk about functions. Functions here look like Java functions. JavaScript was designed at the same time that Java was becoming an important programming paradigm. There was Objective-C, there was C++, there was an effort to make an object-oriented namespace that had an independent VM. That was Java. Did you guys code Java in your introduction to programming? I think we're still teaching Java. I think it's still an important paradigm. I think people get a lot out of that versus Python. Once we start initiating people with Python, we're never going back. The Python paradigm is a lot easier to program with. It's almost scary how easy.
Is our business moving from Java to Python?
It's really, there's not a uniform idea right now. I think that Java is always going to be vulnerable to Python because Java is not necessary in order to code applications any longer. JavaScript is the core of applications right now because it's the interface for the web. But I think that there is no argument that Python is not the leader for data science, machine learning, whatever you would call the back end. You could probably do it very well with Python, the analytics. There's probably not a strong machine learning culture with Java. I know when I was in graduate school, if you wanted to do machine learning, it was going to be in Java. That's where all the open source knowledge discovery was. But that's really been subsumed by Python. But if you think about application engineering, software is not so much on your desktop, and Java would be built for that, applications. It's really about the web. So, all right. So I just want to say that you have, for the first time, a function. And so we're going to summarize everything we want to do within this function and then deliver our executable JavaScript within the body of the function. So here, we're just going to say, whatever you've given me, change the interior HTML of that, or the inner HTML, the visible HTML, to the following. So let me make sure that we can see this. And so what I can do is I can click on this, and it happens. It's very limited. It's very limited. So you need to refresh this. But I can touch the text, and the text will change. And that in itself is not a big deal. But what we like is that we have the ability to supply an on-click event to anything inside of a page. Does that make sense? So typically when we want to click things, it's with a button or it's with an interactive element, typically a button. So now you know how to send an on-click event from a button into JavaScript. And you also have the understanding that ID is very important to JavaScript. Do you want to try that? Take a moment to try this.
Okay.
Do you have it running? Here, we can pause the video and why don't you give it a try. Okay, so I appreciate it. So can I move on to the next concept? If you want, at the end, I can double screen this or I can upload this to Canvas and you can download it. So next I wanted to move on from the concept of clickability. And let's admit that, clickable text is not what the public is looking for. The public is focused on buttons. So what I want to do here is create a new page where there's a button. And what I've done is I've gone back to the same thing I've done for a few days now, which is to label everything with an ID. I like IDs a lot. JavaScript likes IDs. CSS likes classes. Can you remember that? Classes go to CSS. IDs go to JavaScript. So I've created two objects here. I think maybe I have this on.
Did you just make addEventListener or?
Here's what it looks like. I have a simple interactive button that has button text. I can click it and it shows the date. That's it. Very simple. So I just showed this. I didn't make it. I have it ready for you. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I didn't just suddenly type this. Okay, so let's go through this and then we'll have the chance to type it. It does not matter if you just type it. It really matters that you understand what you're looking at. It actually, instead of being little karate kids, we probably need to be more Confucian and we need to really value scholarship. Does that make sense? Like just being a hard worker is less valuable than being scholarly where you're studying. Does that make sense? So I know that's sacrilegious in a polytechnic environment, but it's actually, you need to know the definitions of this language before coding will really start to be fun. So what I do is I make a button. Now the button is the HTML, and this is the content, the text you'll see inside of the button. So this is the button text. And then what I have is a paragraph that I'm going to call by X. So both the button and the paragraph have IDs. Now, you guys want to use an ID whenever you want to connect that HTML element to JavaScript somehow. Now, what JavaScript can do is JavaScript can change the configuration of something. So it can change the content of something. It can also ingest the content of something. So if I had a text box, I could grab the content of the text box and work with that. And you guys will be doing that in a project very soon. So that anything inside of the page has a dot value attribute, and that happens to be what's inside of a text box. Now, in my quick example, I don't have a text box yet. I just have a paragraph. And what I do is I interact with the button and it changes the data inside of the paragraph. This is a very simple example that can be used in many different ways. So my paragraph X is completely empty. And so there's nothing inside of that paragraph. Ultimately, you can see where X is used. I'm going to grab X and I'm going to populate X with the date, but we'll get there in a minute. So here's the difference. In the onClick, I don't have an ID. Here's what I showed you guys a minute ago. There's no ID within the HTML element. Inside of addEventListener, there's IDs in both of them. So instead, what I do is I send the data from the element to JavaScript. And so I work with that element within JavaScript. Here, I set everything up with an ID. So what we're doing inside of the script is we're saying, well, look, grab the document and then grab the element whose ID is B. getElementById means grab the stuff with B in it, which happens to be a button, and then add addEventListener. Now, there are several event listeners that are possible within HTML. There's a hover, there's a click, on change. There's a very limited number of HTML events. On click and on hover are very common. We're going to see that a lot. So add a click event to B that will run display date. And display date is a function that's present within the JavaScript. And so when you run display date, you could say, let's say console dot log, date is now. That would be fine. And I like to work with console a great deal because it gives me a readout of the state of my variables as I move vertically within a program. I can see how variables transform. And so I actually want to know, hey, when I run display date, I want to be made aware that that function is firing. So I want to look inside of the console. And this function, display date, is going to fire when the click event of B is triggered. And that's because the JavaScript is actually enabling click events from within JS as set by JS. And that's fine. I'm just going to set that as a comment. And let me just make this a JavaScript comments are just a double line. And I like to put in a lot of comments while I'm creating something or while I'm working through something. So if you work with me, you'll see a lot of comments and you see a lot of consoles. And then I gradually remove them as I get confirmation that something is working. i.e., I can see the variable transform. I'm doing things correctly behind the scenes. And then I gradually remove the comments because, they're onerous. They really clog things. Okay, good job. So I want to get you used to getElementById. And then I want to get you used to addEventListener. So you can see the results of this. And let's go ahead and open up the inspect. And so there should be a console behind the scenes here. So you would expect for when I click the button that it will throw a little bit of text inside of my console. And it will connect to where that's being done. Very simplistic. Now, the reason why I like this is because it's a Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi example. It's super simple. And you need to kind of memorize getElementById. You're going to use that a lot, and you need to remember a document. But by then, it's pretty easy because you just supply the element ID. And I think addEventListener, that's something that you should be aware of, whether you commit it to memory or not. You can always look up addEventListener. The Googleable web is a very great reference book for you. I love when I usually open up a browser window solely for the purpose of Google searches for code. That's just how it's done. That's how I do it. It's how other people do it. So addEventListener will add the click event. So let me ask you a quick question as you're doing this. What is the relationship between addEventListener and function? What is the relationship between addEventListener and function? How would you describe that?
addEventListener will activate function.
That's excellent. Yeah, the student said, and I don't know if the video can hear this. I really hope that they can. You were saying, if I quote you correctly, the addEventListener adds the function per its specification, per its instructions. So display date is the function, and it's added to the HTML entity during this click event. Does that make sense? So is that different than what happened here on the onClick page, where the HTML, we define an onClick event, and that happened to be a JavaScript function. It's very similar to what's happening here with addEventListener. Now, addEventListener fits within this philosophy of having JavaScript do the web design, where we load up JavaScript with a CSS or with some simplistic HTML, and then JavaScript actually codes the HTML at execution time. That fits in with that idea. And this is a little bit different because, couldn't we say document.addChild .addElement button. And if I get this a little bit wrong, then I'll have to fix it. I'll say L is equal to, let L is equal to this, and then L dot set attribute ID equal to X, or B rather, and then let P equal to document addElement of type paragraph, and then this would do is this would allow me to erase these, or rather comment them, and then at runtime JavaScript would add the HTML at compile time in the client's browser. And so that's fine too. Now, will everybody do that? It just depends. We're okay with, however, will people say we'll hand code the HTML and then have the JavaScript control the HTML, send these attributes to the HTML? Or can we not do that and just say everything happens within a script tag? Don't send the client HTML, have JavaScript do the HTML. Both are quite okay. Here at school, we like to be friendly with whatever the corporate culture is. We can match their expectations. We can do things one way or another. So that's our addEventListener. So let me pause this and let you guys fool around. I think you get the idea. Let me see you hack around a bit with it. Who just helped me finish this. What I was doing with the addEventListener is I was trying to comment these out and say, could I basically do a page without any HTML on it, and then will that page load? Could the JavaScript load a button and then a paragraph, and then could I add a click event to the button? Yes, I can. It will run display date, which is here. And then I will need to set IDs of the button so that, and then we will need to set an ID for the paragraph, which will be X. And so we're replicating the same page structure as we had before with the button and the paragraph, but we're just doing it all via JavaScript. And then, of course, we need to append it all. And just like we did in the last time, but that would be how to take that the next step. Okay. I really appreciate you. I hope you keep working hard.